So we generate those minds of confidence in the path left to us by the teachings of the Buddha. Reflecting on our understanding of the Buddha as an unmistaken guide, reliable, non-deceptive, developing confidence in the result of the path, recognizing that we ourselves can apply diligence, effort, and achieve the same result as the Buddha and all of the great masters of the past. And wanting to do that in order to be of incredible benefit to sentient beings. Recognizing that although we wish to help right now, our ability to be of benefit is limited, but a Buddha's benefit is completely unlimited. So aspiring to our enlightenment to be of perfect benefit. And with that motivation of refuge and bodhicitta, we will continue in the text. So we are on day 109. Not sure, I think it's pretty likely we'll finish this week, this section. I don't know about today, but we'll see. We kind of, no one has ever had a question from a previous class, but just in case, does anyone have a question from a previous class? See, now no one's going to break the streak because it's been unbroken. So, oh well, you'll have to send me an email because you're not going to be the first person. So that's fine. Okay, so we kind of talked about day 109 already, a little bit, I think. We touched on it, which these are the contemplations in the last of the three. Contemplate the last major topic of the 9-point death meditation is that at the time of death, only our spiritual practice is of any benefit. And then there's subpoints, and we're going through those subpoints. And we talked a little bit about, or as an aside, it was mentioned about the body. At the time of death, the body is ultimately the thing that causes our death for whatever reason. Our ability to remain in this life depends upon the body serving as the biological basis for the association of body and mind. So the mind would remain, in this body, but for the breakdown of that biological basis, which can occur through injury, through illness, through simply the breakdown through old age, the organs no longer working as well as they did before. So ultimately, something happens in the physical body that prevents mind from being able to remain associated with that body. So Lama Zopa says, our body, which had been our greatest possession and our greatest friend, becomes our greatest enemy at death, because the cause, whatever cause it is, it's related to the body, not the mind. Um, so, and then he gives us, so, of course, we said before that as with any object of attachment, we exaggerate um, the importance of our body, and so we overemphasize. We talked before about that we don't want to take this to an extreme. We don't, one of the teachings on the middle way is to avoid extreme asceticism, but also to avoid extreme overindulgence. But so we need to make sure that we're giving the body all of the proper care that is necessary, like Geshe Zopa was saying in terms of the food offering prayer, he was saying that we should have a bodhicitta kind of motivation for eating food, for example, to think that we're not eating because the food is delicious. We might, we're not likely to make food that we find repulsive, but doesn't matter. We just think that that's not the ultimate purpose. The ultimate purpose is that the body does need to be sustained in order for our practice to continue to go well. If we feel weak, if we feel tired, then that will ultimately be a hindrance, a distraction to our meditation. So we need to make sure that we're consuming the proper nutrition to sustain our practice, but we don't want to do it solely out of a sense of self-gratification or um, just for pleasure or boredom, or even, or he pointed out, even to just remain alive. That's not, even that isn't sufficient. Remaining alive without joining that life with practice is of no benefit. Um, so it isn't to delay death. It is to create the causes and conditions for continued spiritual growth and development. Should be the goal of the food that we eat. Um, and so there's a text. He recited a prayer in, I think it was in Tibetan, that he, FPMT, in fpmt.org, in their foundation store, they have a booklet. If you're interested, you can just type in food offering prayer in the foundation store in fpmt.org. You can get their booklet. And there's a number of different sort of contemplations and different food offering prayers. In English, the most common one is the Guru is Buddha, the Guru is Dharma, the Guru is Sangha also. The Guru is the creator of all happiness. To all Gurus I make this offering. Which is, if a person's taken refuge, then one of the refuge commitments is to offer the first portion of food and drink to the three jewels. And that's the kind of shortest way to go about that. you don't have to, you can recite it internally. It doesn't have to be said out loud. And then usually, and then he also recited the mantra of purification, which is Om Mahung. So you would recite that generally 3 times um, as well, to transform ordinary food into something allowable to be offered. Just as like when you do the water bowls, you also recite Om Mahung, because you're transforming an ordinary water into something permissible to offer. You're transforming it into a blessed or holy object, transmissible or permissible to be offered. Uh, so you do that as well generally. Yeah, but I do it in English, so you don't have to do it in the Tibetan. Because it's good to connect with what you're doing, because if you do it, I don't know, I kind of feel like if you're doing it in, if you do it a lot, it's personal choice, as long as you can recollect the meaning along with the recitation, then fine. And people will say that the Tibetan has a blessings of the lineage, and that's true too. um, yeah. So he says, borrowed from our parents, destined to become a corpse very soon. Why should we place so much importance on this body? Togme Zongpo compares the body to a guest house that the temporary guest, the mind, will soon leave. The mind will then take residence at another temporary guest house, and then another and another continuously until we break the cycle. So it's kind of like, you know, talking about attachment to the body in the same way that the lamas also often talk about attachment to like your actual home in a way, how the difference between as an analogy, when we go on vacation and we stay in a hotel, even if we're not a huge fan of the painting that's on the wall, or the color scheme that they chose, or the wallpaper that they chose, we don't have any thought of like, oh well, I'm going to take that wallpaper down and I'm going to put up a different color that I like better. um, we're just like, oh, it's not it's not what I would have chosen, but okay. um, but we don't do that in our actual house. We don't. We relate to that differently, because we think of 1 week as somehow being incredibly different than 5 years. Even though, or for one, we kind of think we'll live there forever, but then we keep moving. Like every, I mean, I've been surprised how many times I've moved. Over the past 20 years, I've lived in like 6 different places since you know, since I was 21, and so I didn't really anticipate. It's always, you don't really anticipate that you're only actually going to live there for 5 years, 10 years. Um, but we think that there's something incredibly different about 1 week versus even 5 years or 10 years. And we think that we can't tolerate, that color, that kind of wallpaper. We have to see it every day. But then also, even if we think we'll live somewhere for 10 years, we may only live there for a day because we might die that day. Um, so, but still, we have this obsession with, oh, is my furniture in vogue this season, or is it time to refresh the drapes, and all of these things that are just so kind of silly. um, and but he's saying that, and our body, of course, is the one thing that we're going to, of course, the body's changing. We get weird things on our heads out of nowhere. um, the body is continually changing, but it's the only thing that we keep for the entirety of this life. We but and still, Lama Zopa is saying even that is temporary, even that, because from the mind's perspective, or from the perspective of the mind, um, even 100 years is nothing compared to eternity, compared to the beginning and endless nature of the mind. Just like being in a hotel for 3 days is nothing when you compare, because it's just it's just a comparison. It's one thing, it's a small thing compared to a larger thing. We relate to 3 days in a hotel very differently than we relate to 5 years or 10 years in a home. The mind, if the mind could have its own view, it would be like, okay, well, this is 100 years in this body, but I exist beginninglessly and endlessly. And so its perspective would be like, it's like 3 days in a hotel. Like, what's the big deal? It's not what's there to get excited about, or depressed about, or, so it's just perspective in that way. So any thoughts or questions?
Like organizations may talk about
any thoughts or questions about the first contemplation? So it's kind of just a way, just like we can just use different tools, different techniques to try to relate differently, to have a more holistic, more reasonable way of thinking about our relationship to the body, and not give it so much importance. Give it the importance that is reasonable and useful and serves our purpose, but not to go too far in the extreme. Okay, so then day 110.
Venerable.
Yes. Mm-hmm.
Aaron has his
Oh, I'm
hand up.
sorry. I didn't notice. It usually kind of pops up. Or it changes the order of things.
Well, I didn't know that on that side. My question was, how do we understand that particular one with emptiness itself? Because my understanding is, like, with Nagarjuna stated that, like, if emptiness is true, there's not really time as we think about it. And I understand, like, there's the conventional and ultimate, but which should kind of guide us there?
Well, from the perspective of the low scope of the Lamrim, what we're focused on here is trying to get to a point, because I think I would say that the practical benefit of these contemplations is focusing in on the fact that there is body and mind associated, and there are, with that particular association of body and mind that's arising at the moment, there has been this coming together of incredibly favorable causes and conditions. And so the real essence is of these contemplations is, how do we become someone who is extracting that essence? How do we become someone who is really, really oriented toward consistent practice, deep practice, letting go of distractions, letting go of the meaningless affairs of this life. And so, in that sense, recognizing that, convention, of course, again, from the mind's perspective, the mind isn't bothered by the changing of bodies, or the mind is not experiencing, because as you're saying, like, a year is the amount of time that it takes the earth to revolve. It's a completely made up thing. An hour is a completely made up thing. There is no ultimately existing inherently existent concept of time. And yet, this body and this mind will separate. And while this body and this mind are together, there is an incredibly favorable set of causes and conditions that are arising. And so, what we really are focused on is making the most of that. And so, recognizing that that favorability may end, and then conventionally speaking, another lifetime that may be unfavorable will arise. And thinking about how we want to avoid that possibility. We want to set ourselves up for that favorability to continue uninterruptedly until the mind has achieved the state of enlightenment. So I think thinking about it in those terms is, at this stage, the most beneficial way of thinking about it. How do I make sure that I'm creating the causes and conditions for all of these favorable internal and external supports to remain until enlightenment is accomplished? Any other questions, thoughts, questions? Okay, so day 110 is our Dharma practice is the insurance policy that guarantees a good death. So now we've moved on to the last of these contemplations. So in this last major topic, we've now gotten to, at the time of death, only our Dharma practice is of any benefit. We've seen how our possessions are of no real benefit. Our friends and family and our loved ones at the time of death are of no real benefit. They're, if they're doing all of the right things, then there is some benefit. But ultimately, still, there comes a point where we're not connected to, we can't hear, we can't see. And so the actual death itself, we're experiencing in an isolated way. And then, like we said, if they're crying and wailing and pleading with us not to die, that can be unhelpful. Unfortunately, that can be unhelpful. And our attachments can be unhelpful if we can't accept what is arising and we wish for it to be otherwise and it can't be otherwise, then that's also unhelpful. So our friends, our family, our possessions, and our body, we've seen how those things that have utility in various ways at the moment of our death are not particularly helpful. What is now is this last contemplation, that the totality of the efforts that we've made in developing the mind is what's truly of benefit at the time of death. He says, only dying, Lama Zopa says, only dying with a positive state of mind can help to die free from the three poisons, but especially without attachment, means that we can have a peaceful and happy death and a good rebirth. This is definitely possible, and the only way we can secure such a positive mind is by practicing Dharma. So he says, there's no other question we need to ask ourselves other than, do I want to have a happy death or a miserable death? If we can truthfully answer that question, then all the other questions we face in life will fall away, and the only priority in everything we do will be to ensure a happy death. Without understanding this vital point, nothing else makes sense. So he's encouraging us to think of using our, every moment that we remain in this life, using it to ensure that we're creating the inner causes and conditions to die well. And like he said, our attachments are at that time, that is, if the attachments are strongly arising, those are going to be the things that cause us to fight against the arising of the death process, to be like, oh no, I cannot bear to be separated from this body, from my friends and family, from my possessions. That experiencing that impending separation is going to give rise to a strong anxiety, strong craving, strong grasping. And that process, broadly speaking, is what will, it's going to arise on some level, even if it arises in a subtle way. That is what will create another rebirth. If we're able to achieve enlightenment in this lifetime, then it will be completely absent, and mind will be able to separate without any remainder of samsara. But even when it arises in a subtle way, that is what activates karma that generates another samsaric rebirth. But so here we're talking really just about when that happens, we want it to at least conventionally be a rebirth with those beneficial supports associated with it. It's a constructive rebirth, a rebirth that allows us to continue to practice, to have teachers, to make additional progress, and not a rebirth where we're obstructed from those things. Of course, best if we can achieve full enlightenment within this lifetime, that's fantastic. Or, again, like Geshe Zopa was saying, during the death time, when the clear light arises, that's another opportunity that we're presented with. If we aren't able to cause the clear light to arise in meditation prior to that, it naturally arises at the time of death. If we can recognize the arising of the mind of clear light, perhaps we can then achieve enlightenment, or we can at least get really, really strong imprints if we join that with the wisdom, understanding emptiness to whatever degree we have been able to realize it between now and then. Kodo. You see, I waited. I kept talking. I didn't stop. I've learned.
We're learning
slowly.
together, Dondrub-la. We're learning together. When we talk about the clear light and the light coming in, whether it's at death or during a meditation, is that Kundalini rising?
It's the absorption of. So I haven't really studied Kundalini specifically much, but generally because you say Kundalini rising, so that generally that is something that is starting from the lower channels and is, as you say, it's rising upward. So that's more. I don't know if that's. I don't know exactly what it is. I can't define it in Tibetan terms exactly. The mind of clear light is the absorption of all of the different winds. So Kundalini may have some association with the upward rising wind, which is one of the main winds. It could be a purified aspect of the upward rising wind, but I'm not sure. Because there's the upward rising wind, there's the downward voiding wind, there's the all-pervasive wind, there's different wind energies. And in order for the mind of clear light to arise, all of these winds have to absorb into the heart center in the central channel. And so they absorb kind of in all directions. They absorb from the top down, from the bottom up, and from all of the sides inward simultaneously. And they say, they describe how, some people can cause some of the winds to like partially absorb, but not all of the. So literally all of the winds have to simultaneously absorb into the heart center in the central channel. And only that is the arising of the mind of clear light. Aaron.
And my question was, what is the relationship between the clear light and the Pure Land practices like Vowa? And like, are those Sutriana? Are those Vajrayana? Or
So the clear light it's just a completely natural thing that, because it's the mind, it's the subtlest kind. It's when the mind. So as a person is dying, as a sentient being, human or animal, I don't know. I don't know if it's the same for other forms, but it's the same for all humans and all animals on Earth. As a human or animal is going through the death process, what's happening is that the mind is becoming increasingly subtle. The mind of a living person, healthy living person, that's not meditating is quite coarse. Their mind is apprehending and interacting with objects of awareness in the environment. The speech is possible, cognition, coarse cognition. So it's a very coarse mind that's arising. During the death process, all of that is dissolving. The mind is becoming increasingly subtle. And there comes a point, so of course we've alluded to, the different dissolutions, and which turns out they're not in the book, because we're near the end, but they come from Vajrayana, the mirage-like appearance, the smoke-like appearance, the firefly-like appearance, the dark black near attainment, these different levels, the different karmic appearances. There comes a point where the mind cannot become more subtle than it is. And that's the mind of clear light. The next moment, the mind enters the bardo. And at that moment, the mind is more coarse than it was when the mind of clear light was arising. Because there's now a coarser form, you're in the intermediate state, the mind is subtly more coarse than it was immediately before when the mind of clear light was arising. And clear light, as I understand it, is just a way of talking about the karmic appearance. It isn't intrinsically existent clear light, just like black near attainment is a way of just talking about the karmic appearance of that state, the fireflies, the smoke, the mirage. These are just karmic appearances. But at that time, it is as if the consciousness is suffused with a vast, open, translucent, clear light, like they kind of say, similar to dawn, on a very, very still, perfect day, the sky at dawn is kind of like the mind of clear light. So all they really have are analogies or kind of ways of thinking, and it's just a karmic appearance. And so maybe for a dog, the mind of clear light is subjectively a little bit different, but still there comes a point, because their winds are maybe a little bit different. I don't know. But there comes a point where the mind is at its most subtle, and the karmic appearance is as like clear light is arising, and so they just call it the mind of clear light, just like they call it the mind of black near attainment, the smoke-like appearance, the mirage-like appearance, the fire. These are all just karmic appearances because of the way that the winds are dissolving. So the winds unavoidably will gather in the central channel at the time of death, immediately before mind exits the body and mind enters the bardo. It just so happens that a person can learn to make that happen in meditation using Vajrayana. Poa is the forceful ejection of the consciousness into a pure land, which is generally a person can learn that practice in themselves, and they can try to die in such a way that they eject their own consciousness into a pure land. It can be done also through potentially an enlightened beings engaging in the practice on your behalf, or even perhaps, ideally you would hope for a fully enlightened, being to be doing that. You'd hope to make a connection with, someone who could do that. Perhaps it doesn't have to be that. Perhaps a very, very highly realized great master could also, they themselves not being fully enlightened, still could cause your consciousness to be ejected in that way. So what it means is that you yourself haven't necessarily created the other kinds of karmic causes for a pure land rebirth to arise in a quote unquote more natural way. Like maybe you haven't developed that level of connection with Amitabha's pure land or whatever, but due to the force of the Poa practice, your mind is just kind of forcefully ejected into a pure land. Because it can also happen that the Pure Land rebirth is the result of your own practice of the Pure Land. But a Poa is different than that. But the mind of clear light is just a natural part of the death process. I assume it would still happen even if Poa was being done, but I'm not sure. I would assume you can't skip the mind of clear light. Your mind has to go through that process, and then you're just skipping. But you are skipping the bardo. You're skipping the intermediate state. Kodo.
Dondrub, can you recommend a book or two or three or four? I keep collecting books about the winds. Is that it's not in the any of the Lamrims, is it? It's more in Bardo or Tantra?
Yeah, it comes from the
Which-
Vajrayana teachings.
Vajrayana.
So yeah, and generally there's a big, in Tibetan Buddhism, there's generally a big distinction between the Lamrim teachings and the Tantric teachings. So a book about the winds, I don't know that I have studied, because in FPMT's module on death, they do kind of bring in the dissolutions in an introductory way, even though it's broadly speaking a sutra module. So that's mainly, and then of course, like centers will have courses on, or weekends on death and so on, and they will bring in the dissolutions. And those are kind of the places that I've run into it. Not so much primary source written material. Robert Thurman's book on the Tibetan Book of the Dead, I think, has stuff on it. Well, I don't know. Yeah, I think, what's it? Yeah, the Tibetan Book of the Dead, the great book of natural liberation through understanding in the between meaning the bardo, the intermediate state. That's Robert Thurman's translation of the historical Tibetan Book of the Dead. That is probably the only book that I've read that goes into detail about the intermediate state and the death process. Yeah.
Chris just found a book that might help describe the.
Well, what regarding the earlier question on the winds and the channels and the Kundalini, also the Clear Light of Bliss by Kelsang Gyatso. So this is the bliss of inner fire, Lama Yeshe.
Thank you. Sorry, what was the name again? Clear Light of Bliss?
The bliss of inner fire is this one, Lama Yeshe, and then the Clear Light of Bliss by Kelsang Gyatso. I think it's also an FPMT publication.
No, I believe that is from the New Kadampa tradition. I don't think that would be the same kind of lineage, but yeah, Lama Yeshe's book on, and I mean, it's all related. The historical, which I haven't received any teachings on, is the 6 yogas of Naropa, is the kind of general. Chumo is, one of the principal parts of the 6 yogas of Naropa. That are all related to these Vajrayana, but it's of course that would of course apply to a practitioner who has a highest yoga tantra initiation of Gyoya Samaja or Chakra Samvara or Vajra Yogini, Tara, one of these, Chittamani Tara. So, and then the 6 yogas of Naropa is like Tumo and these other practices that are involved in these energetic practices that are helpful in causing the winds to dissolve and abide in the central channel on the stage, on the completion stage of tantric practice. Okay. So day 111, when we actually have the realization of impermanence and death, we will never do anything meaningless again. So this is, kind of a further elaboration of what he was saying before, that if we ask ourselves, what do I want to get out of my life if we think, well, the thing that I want to be able to do is to die well. And if I realize that in order to die well, I have to, I can't rely on external factors. I can't rely on amassing status or reputation or wealth or possessions or relationships. I can only rely on the network of internal constructive causes and conditions and habits and tendencies and familiarities that I've built up over hopefully decades of consistent practice. Then the extension of that is that we will orient ourselves toward engaging in that, and then away from all of the silly things like we talked about, all of the exaggerations of body and possessions, and all of the eight worldly concerns of just wanting more, wanting better, going beyond our needs, going beyond our and just thinking about having greater status, greater power, greater reputation, beyond what serves our spiritual lives. Yeah. So then day 112. Again, he points out, that even though this is a heavy topic, the goal isn't to depress us. The goal isn't to make us fearful of the fact that we will die. The goal is to help us create the causes and the conditions to be able to face that well, to be able to die already having created all of the causes and conditions that will safeguard us through that process, that the death itself is just the mind leaving one particular form, which is natural and ordinary and nothing different than just like we're taking this breath, then we're going to take that breath, and then at some point we are going to take a bardo body, and then there's going to be a different body. It's just a normal, natural progression. But if we don't create the causes and the conditions that will take care of that process and will keep us safe during that process, then there are potential disadvantages. There are potential drawbacks of that process. And in order to be protected from that, we have to spend our lives engaging in the kinds of causes and conditions that will keep us safe as we go through that, because there are pitfalls, there are things can go in a way that we don't want, and then our enlightenment will be delayed, and sentient beings will continue to suffer, and we will be powerless to be of any benefit because we're kind of meaninglessly experiencing suffering, or even meaninglessly experiencing the bliss of the upper realms. It's all kind of unimportant compared to staying on a consistent path dedicated just to awakening. He says the concept of a fearful death has been created by the mind that clings to the permanent things of this world, permanent in quotes, all the things that will be lost when death happens, not being able to let go of life and the things of this life, that makes death terrifying. The unsubdued mind that is controlled by attachment to worldly pleasures creates this fear, not the death itself. So if we spend our lives overcoming that attachment, then the death will be peaceful. The death, will be able to just let go of this temporary collection, these aggregates, and think, oh, I have an opportunity to appropriate new, vital, young, healthy aggregates and let go of a body that isn't as serviceable, isn't as useful. Or we can think, oh, I have an opportunity to even actualize enlightenment during the death process. And so we look forward, he was saying before how great practitioners can actually look forward to death in that way, not thinking of it as some painful separation, but thinking of it as an opportunity to either fully achieve enlightenment or at least have a body that has all of the causes and conditions to energetically practice, because hopefully by that time we'll be, our bodies will be kind of worn out, and we'll be like, oh, how wonderful it would be if I could go through that more energetic, more vital period where I can really be traveling and teaching and helping and meditating clearly, and but doing that all with the purpose of achieving enlightenment, not just accumulating, not having a career and doing all of the silly things, but really just thinking, oh, that kind of form would be really helpful for engaging in the bodhisattva deeds, for example, practicing acts of generosity and so on. Okay. Okay. Any thoughts or questions? Nope. All right. So we'll leave it there, and we'll go ahead and just say that we've covered. There's one more contemplation, but it's it's really just again hitting home that same point that that the real purpose of engaging in this reflection is that it will move us into a mind, the kind of mind that focuses on what's really important. Amassing wealth and status and so on is of no benefit, but becoming more compassionate, becoming more patient, more wise, more loving, those are all incredibly beneficial, and that kind of inner peace is what we'll be able to take with us in future lives, whereas all of the things that we accumulate, they all fall away at death naturally. So the tough news is that we're now going to be discussing the suffering of the lower realms, which is everyone's least favorite topic. But there's not a whole month of contemplations. I think there's only like 2 weeks worth of contemplations. So it won't take too long. But we are not going to skip it. We're going to have a brave, courageous attitude, willing to face the suffering of the lower realms so that we avoid creating the causes and the conditions that give rise to the lower realms. So we will end with dedicating. So we recollect the altruistic motivation that we established. We think that that altruistic motivation has been actualized by our efforts, and that has created positive energy in the mind, and we have a sense of letting that positive energy go and thinking, may it ripen in whatever way is truly beneficial for sentient beings. So just on your own, visualize incredibly vast, beneficial ways that you would like that positive energy to ripen. All right. So we will pick things up on Thursday.